Welcome back, everybody. Boy, I tell you what, it's a beautiful day to be sitting here with you, talking to you today, and sitting here with my good friend, Chancey Lewis. What do you think about it today, bud?
Oh, good morning, Bradley. Good morning, everyone. Yep, same thing. We've been blessed again with a lot of pretty Sundays here lately. You know, here it is, the second Sunday in a row that we've got a bluebird day again, so it's nice. Yesterday it was snowing and sleet, an hour, and then an hour and a half later it was sun shining and 10 degrees hotter, so crazy weather in Texas.
We got all that yesterday.
Yeah.
And now tomorrow is Valentine's Day.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so me and Chancey, if you don't know, we record here at a feed store that we own in Cameron Farm and Ranch Company that where we sell feed and different things, and my wife has a lot of stuff that she likes to do, and so she's doing Valentine's baskets for Valentine's this week that she delivers to the schools, and we kind of got kicked out of our recording studio.
Yeah, we are. We're sitting in her shop.
Yeah.
She's not here and sees us set up in her boutique.
One of these days when we get good enough at technology, me and Chancey are going to set up a camera and video this so you could actually see what we do during one of these episodes. But we got booted out because it looks like Valentine's threw up in there. It's balloons and candy and baskets and all kinds of stuff. And our other little recording studio we go to is full of plants because it was 28 this morning here.
Yes.
And we got our first shipment of tomatoes and flowers and all that type of stuff. My favorite time of the year. I love gardening and the plants and all that time of stuff. Just makes you feel like spring is in the air.
Oh, yeah, it's here. And, and out there in the woods and pastures, you start paying attention. Look, spring's here. It's coming. There's little spring wildflowers and stuff that's, you're starting to come. I saw some bloodweed, coming up that was only about 2 or 3 inches tall the other day.
I bet it liked that 28-degree weather.
Yeah, it was down in that bottom, and it may have survived or not. I didn't look at it this morning, but I noticed it just the other day, some little blood or giant ragweed, what some people call it around here.
Well, the cold weather is definitely hanging around this year.
Yeah.
And of course, it's still the 1st of February, so a lot of things are about to start happening in the agriculture world. Here in the next couple weeks, whenever it starts, soil temperatures start to warm up and the earth tilts just a little bit, man, it makes all the world a difference in what's going on and the way you feel and everything else.
Sure. Well, I know all them farmers, they're getting really, it's fixing to be planting season.
Yes.
For corn.
People putting planters on and
Yep.
and about to start putting it out there and hope a little late freeze don't come and hope for the best with as expensive as everything is this year. There's also the time of the year to be doing different things in the woods, and today we're going to talk to you a little bit more. We left off last week. We talked about 2 of them, I believe. We discussed controlled burning last week and about the importance of that this time of the year. What else did we mention last week,
We also talked about disking.
We talked about disking and stirring up soil, and it's the time of the year to be doing that. Well, we kind of left off 2 of the little topics of that also is some very important things that you could be doing in the woods right now.
Yeah, so like I know that we mentioned last week, shredding, browse surveys, disking, fire, and we went, like Bradley said, we went into detail on the 2 of them, but today we'll spend just a little bit of time going in a little bit more detail, just kind of brush on shredding and browse surveys and why we do those things and what are some of the benefits of them. So I guess, just start with browse surveys. And you hear about browse surveys a lot, particularly if you're a manager, that's gotten interested in like MLDPs or managed land deer permits or because browse is really looking from a deer management standpoint. It's really common in South Texas, but they're starting to utilize it a little bit more in the hill country and even in our neck of the woods in the east, But browse surveys is a big deal in South Texas. And it's important for us during wildlife season because it can be a form of census. You can turn that in with one of your 7 management practices in wildlife, is census. And a browse survey can be used as a census if you're not doing a spotlight survey or if you're not counting, winter bird surveys. Or
this is a check in the box for that.
Or it's check in the box for it, And I actually like browse surveys because I did tons of them when I worked for Parks and Wildlife, but I still utilize them too. And maybe it's just the plant guy in me. But the plants are telling you because the plants are what the critters are eating, and they're telling you. So I'm always looking at plants.
And I know very little about this, but talking to Chancey is really quite fascinating.
Well, yeah, so basically a browse survey, it's used to help determine deer density and carrying capacity. Now, it's not, an exact science, not written in stone, and there's some bias in it, as far as because, each individual biologist or each individual landowner is counting plants. But it's basically you go out to your property, and you count your first, second, third choice plants. And what you're trying to do is you're going to try to count that current year's growth. And you're going to be doing this in the wintertime. And the reason that we want to do it in the wintertime is because, number one, the wintertime, like I said, from a wildlife standpoint, the woody plants are your backbone of your habitat. They're the meat and potatoes that always has to be there.
So give us a few of these, Chancey, the first, second, and third choice plants that you're talking about when you talk about these browse.
So first choice plants that I'm always looking at in this neck of the woods is hackberry, cedar elm.
Those are first choice.
Those are first choice plants.
They're going to be the first thing eaten.
If it's within a deer's reach in a bottomland, you're going to see some type of pressure on there, unless there's just no deer. Hawthorns, any of your like what people call not possum haw. Possum haw's deciduous holly here, but like your hawthorn, your genus Crataeguses, what people call red haws around here. There's several different species. That's a good deer food. Greenbriers that we mentioned, deciduous holly is a really good one. So, deciduous holly and yopon are really, they're like kissing colors. They've got the same genus. One of them loses its leaf, the other one's doesn't. Deciduous holly is a good deer food, great deer food, whereas yopon's not so much. But they occur in same habitats. Most of the time, if you got a deer density that's pretty high, you're going to see some serious use on your deciduous holly.
So we can't really use those to be our indicator because that's dessert. Like those deer,
ice cream.
They love to eat that.
They're going to eat them, but
they'll overeat on that.
Yes, I look at them because this is why. If I start seeing those plants that aren't regenerating, like if there's so many of your ice cream plants and if they were out in the open, they're just being hammered, that it's losing its viability. It's losing it's becoming what I call thrifty, spindly. It just doesn't look good. Doesn't look like it has much vigor. That means that plant is every time, it's energy. It's already tough. So it tries to put on a new growth to take the sun's energy, but then something's biting it off. So then it's got to take energy from its root to try it again. If you can, continue this process on and on and on, that plant will eventually die. So I'm constantly looking at those first choice plants because from a deer standpoint, and my standpoint, you want as many first choice plants as you can out there. So constantly monitor them, constantly look for them, but also be really looking at your second choice plants too. Because
once they run out of the first choice, these are going to be the next thing they go to.
Yeah, they're going to be going to your second choice plants. And be looking at them because if you start in the wintertime, start seeing 40, 50, 60% use on the current year's growth. And so you can kind of tell if you've paid attention to the way a plant grows. We said they grow from the very tops and the very bottom. So the apical meristem. So like last year, we had such a crazy year. If you planted, a little bush or a little tree, it had 3 growth spurts last year. I planted a little oak last year. It grew in the spring probably 6-7 inches, and then it grew again the next rain in the next month and a half, and it had 3 growth spurts last year. And you can kind of tell by the color of the bark and by the color of the stem that current year. And if that current year is getting bit off, every time, you can tell the difference between what was grown this year and what was grown the previous year, just on the plant. And so that's what you're counting, that current year's growth, because it's telling you how much use is going on right now on your property. We would just go with a tally counter, one of those little clickers, and you walk to each species of plant, and you count 100 stems. And some of them you may not be able to get 100 stems of new. And when I say stems, apical meristems, and we're counting bites. How many bites we're seeing.
And this is at a certain height, too.
Yeah, within a deer's reach. So you're thinking everything in a deer's world's basically, 36 inches and down. You're counting stuff that's within reach. You're not counting anything up high, and you're not counting third choice stuff like mesquite, and I wouldn't even consider third choice even. They won't hardly browse it, but you're counting that stuff there, and you're counting bites. And that's what you're looking for on that current choice. And that will give you over time, if you plant enough. So you count 100 stems of a first choice, all the first choice you can find. Then you go count 100 stems of your second choice. And then you've got a tally counter. You enter it into a little spreadsheet, and it'll spit it back out at you. It's like, look, you got this much use on your first choice, your second choice. And that kind of gives you an idea. And you use that to also go with your spotlight survey or your stand count surveys or your pellet counts or your online, whatever survey method you're using.
It's more data.
It's more data. You're putting more data points there on the board. It's making you have a better idea how to manage your herd.
And while you're on the topic of talking about counting bite marks, well, you could tell the deer's bite from other types of animals.
Yes. So this is very critical too, y'all, because especially in South Texas, we also have lots of things that are eating the brush down there. Wood rats are eating the brush. Cattle will browse. Cattle, I know.
They love that.
They'll definitely browse, but their feeding strategy is different. And so a deer does not have a top teeth. They have a hard palate. They have bottom teeth and no top teeth. Well, no top front teeth. They have top teeth in the back, but. And so when a deer bites something, you think deer are very selective. They're not like a cow just reaching in there and grabbing and pulling. They're reaching and grabbing one particular apical meristem, one particular little twig on that woody plant, and they're biting it off. Because they don't have top teeth, they generally will leave like a little tit of bark hanging, like a little tit that sticks off. Whereas a rodent has top teeth, like a wood rat that browses a lot. And, some of the old literature from Dixon and Mammals of Texas, they even considered some types of wood rats that got so abundant in South Texas as a limiting factor to deer herd.
Oh, wow, because they're the competition for browse.
Yes. And if you've ever seen some of them wood rats down there and some of the mittens they've made and how much browse and how much use they can do, I believe it. But they have top teeth, so they always bite at like a 45-degree angle. You can see a bite on a little twig. It's always at a 45-degree angle, sharp.
The rodents?
From a rodent, yeah. And even rabbits. If you're out in West Texas or in places of South Texas, rabbits will browse, especially jackrabbits. They have top teeth as well. So they have a different bite. So when we're out there doing those, we're counting those deer bites. And for lack of a better, there's almost always a little tit with it. I think you can Google search, white-tailed deer bite, and there's probably a picture of it that some biologist took for Parks and Wildlife or something and put it up there, but that's what we're going after. So basically, we're counting in the winter, doing those surveys. It goes to our surveys, and it's basically to try to help us manage for drought, like we said.
Well, I think that's important to point out, Chancey. When you're counting this, you're counting this for a number of deer that you would want to have under the worst circumstances. In a drought, like whenever conditions are really limited.
Yes, because that tells you if you're running a carrying capacity that can handle a drought year, that means when you have a good year,
you'll have really good deer.
Yeah,
you'll have plenty to eat.
Icing on the cake.
Yes, and so really we should probably be doing the same thing with people.
Yeah, well, no, we definitely need to live within our natural resources and our limiting factors.
Yes,
for sure.
yes. It doesn't seem like we do that enough.
Well, wars have been fought over limited resources.
Oh, absolutely, and it will again one day.
Yeah.
That's the first, second, and third choice plants that Chancey talked about. Then we mentioned some third choice.
Yeah, in my neck of the woods, third choice plants are something that they're just not going to eat at all. Like in South Texas, it'd be like desert yopon. And here, I know yopon is, for the most part, kind of considered a second choice plant here. But in my book, I kind of lump it with a third choice plant, I don't like seeing much use on yopon. Some other third choice plants out there would be, like older blackjack oak, And like I said, some people there's a kind of some gray area between whereas a second choice end and a third choice begin.
Right.
But as for the most part, a lot of those plants have lots of resins and tannins, or a lot of your stuff. Not like poison ivy. I mean, deer love poison ivy, but some of those yopon is a good one. Let's say grasses, but they just can't utilize grass or anything like that.
Was there a magical number on these counts to where you're like, okay, I got too many deer here, we're going to have to do something?
Well, like I said, most of it you start looking at your first choice, and then you start looking at your second choice, because those are your two main ones,
Is there like a percentage, though, Chancey? Like, okay, I counted 100 of these.
Yeah, about 40 to 60 stem bites,
okay.
on a second choice plant. So, like I said, if you're starting seeing, 40 to 60% use going into the fall or early winter on your second choice plants, you probably got too many deer. Yeah, you probably got too many for that habitat anyway. Because if you're seeing 60% use on your second choice, chances are your first choice are little or non-existing, or not doing very well at all, or they're growing in a place that a deer can't reach. So a lot of your first choice, they'll be protected, like where a deer couldn't reach them, or growing as a nursery plant up underneath some shrub. That's kind of the thing to look at. And also hedging, so you can also just tell by the way the plant's growing if it's getting a lot of use. You'll have hedged plants if they just keep getting hammered and hammered and hammered. I mean, I was on a place out in Marble Falls 2 weeks ago, and they had some kidney wood out there, and I mean, where you found it, it was just shredded, hedged to all get out. It was like a landscape plant, like somebody have in their yard, and that's just from deer, just from
wow.
deer eating it, and eventually we'll kill it. They had way too many deer on that place.
I mean, around here especially, it seems to be like it's getting to be way too many deer. I bet if you went and did your browse surveys like you're supposed to, you'd probably see a lot of overgrazing going on that.
Yeah, especially in your bottomlands. Here in Milam County, you go get down in your bottomlands and you go look at your cedar elms, and you go look at your hackberries, and you go look at your possum halls, and you go look at your little hawthorns, your crataeguses, and another good first choice browse plant that covers and bombs. And it's really fun. I like counting it. It's just a good plant. It's rough leaf dogwood. You start looking at those plants in our bottomlands, and it will tell you real fast that you got deer. Even though you're not thinking you're seeing them, your plants aren't lying. They tell the truth.
And so the it's not a good idea at this point to go out there and supplemental feed, because you're just fueling the problem that you already have by, which is like in cattle, you're like, okay, they don't have enough to eat, I'm going to go feed them.
Yeah. Well, in the wildlife world, theoretically it's mismanagement to try to use supplemental feed to increase your carrying capacity beyond the habitat. In our world, we try to manage the habitat, and supplement is what it just is. So generally, if you got too many deer on your place and they're hurting the habitat, that's when harvest probably needs to be increased.
Makes sense, my friend.
Yep, harvest increasing. So that's why, the state started allowing us to shoot does in Milam County, because, they can sustain a harvest now. Try to keep it within the carrying capacity.
And Chancey could help you with any of this kind of stuff, with any of these population counts and surveys and all this type of stuff through his business that he does. So that's a little bit about browse surveys. And now that brings us, I guess, to the other thing you could be doing this time of the year, because you don't want to wait too long to do this one.
No. And the other one's shredding. And so basically shredding, I like to use it if burning and grazing is not feasible. A lot of us landowners, we're just not set up to run cattle, or don't have the cross fences, or for whatever reason.
Or you have your place in wildlife.
Or you have it in wildlife. You just don't want to mess with cattle. Or, or if you're trying to destock, some places, destock for a little while and let their land heal for a while. So that's where you could go and use shredding, And like I said, it's not, in my opinion, as good as grazing, but it's the next best thing, for removing decadent grass, from burning. So,
and sometimes conditions won't allow you to burn.
No, if you
in dry, windy conditions, on at the time of the year you need to be doing it.
Sure, or your time constraints, whatever reason, sometimes you just can't pull off a burn. It takes a lot of moving parts to make a burn. You got to have help. You have to have people. You have to have equipment.
You have to have good neighbors.
You got to have good neighbors. You need the humidity at the right. You need the wind speed at the right. You got a lot of different things in moving parts you're trying to think about.
And all you need to shred is diesel and a tractor.
Yeah. That's all you got to do.
Maybe a tube of grease if you're one of those guys.
Sure, yeah, definitely need a grease. It makes me think of my brother. I borrowed his shredder one time, and I looked at that dang thing. I was like, I don't think he's ever greased that shredder. That wheel wouldn't even turn.
The PTO shaft won't even slide. You got to use a hammer to beat it on. Wouldn't know anything about that, Chancey.
No. But basically, so shredding can be done in
That's
February.
a whole nother episode on equipment maintenance.
Oh, man, golly. But, it's so critical. Just greasing something every day and just making attention could save you so much headache down the road.
Yes, it could.
Golly.
But a match is a lot easier to maintain than what a shredder is. But again, you got to have all the right conditions for that. Whereas shredding, you could go out there this time of the year and take care of it in a day's time, but you don't want to wait too long.
No, and so right now you can shred in February, and I kind of recommend shredding any time from August to February, even in mid-March, depending on what your goals are. But you can shred right now in real decadent stands like February right now, and that promotes forb growth. It'll let sunlight get back down into the ground and increase that soil temperature just a little bit, make some plants germinate, whereas you're just sitting there with decadent grass and not standing, hadn't been stimulated, it's not as productive. So doing it right now, you can also help your bunch grasses, and then you can also stimulate forb growth. Something to mention, this is extremely, extremely important. If you have a property of native grass, particularly a little blue stem, and it has not been what I would say grazed or burned or shredded in a period of years, it's just been sitting there kind of decadent, starting to look thrifty, be very careful shredding it. You can kill little blue stem by shredding it too low, particularly any of these. So a lot of these bunch grasses, they don't like to be grazed too low or shred too low, but it's one of those things that you can kind of train them to.
Compared to a Bermuda grass.
Yeah, like so, native range, I always say take half, leave half, and theoretically by taking half, that means you only let the cattle graze 25% of it, because the other 25% is going to get trampled or urined on or pooped on or whatever. That's 50%, then leave 50%. That's kind of the general rule, that range managers try to follow. But
it's even important this time of the year when it's dormant.
I asked a range specialist at one time, I was like, because when you burn it, you take it all the way down.
Very true.
What's the difference? And their answer was, yes, it is. But I could possibly argue that maybe a little bit, and I may be wrong, I could see arguing because, like, well, what's the difference between burning it right now? Because if you burn it right now, it burns it right to the ground.
Yeah, you don't leave much. You don't leave 50% of it at that point.
No. So, but I think, from a habitat standpoint, because you want to, even if you burn, you don't want to.
This
burn
isn't
all of it
necessarily
anyway.
for plant health. Probably the 50% is more for what you're leaving for the wildlife.
Yes, and for your cattle too, because even guys that are grazing their native range, that native range is a renewable resource. And those cattle guys, they know if they destroy the resource, they're not going to be able to continue running cattle on it,
Right.
without having to put in major inputs in it. It's always good to, if you're going to shred a decadent little blue stem that has not been burned or grazed for a long time, be very careful. Do not shred it the first year and destroy the integrity of the bunch because, like I said, if you don't kill it, you'll set it back tremendously. So for a lot of our little blue stem, that's probably around 8 inches. So don't shred it any lower than that, especially if it hasn't been disturbed. Now, the next year, you could probably get by shredding a little bit lower.
I wonder if that depends on the time of the year, too. Like, for instance, if you shred it lower in the middle of the winter, like a month ago, and then we get all this ice and stuff on top of it without that extra
I think
mass,
so.
that extra biomass there to protect it. I bet you that probably could cause an issue, too, with removing too much at the wrong time.
It probably does because most of the shredding, I know this firsthand because I've done it. When I was young, oh, yeah, I'd go shred and you always hear, but I'm like, whoa. Shredded that way too low because the next year you look back, it's looking terrible, real thrifty. And that was an area that hadn't been grazed or burned or shredded. I went in there real green, thinking, oh, I'm going to change the world, make this great. And, it made it better, but also hurt some stuff too. So you live and you learn.
And you need to get this done before fawning season.
Yes, fawning nesting. You don't want to be shredding so right now, February, good, but you don't want to be shredding during fawning nesting season. So that's summertime, spring, up until about August. Come August, you can start shredding. I like to shred twice a year. I try to shred in August, get everything moved, decadent, let your fall rains come. You have good fall wildflowers. Same thing this time of year. Shred now, get it going. And I've even shredded in places of my little blue stem where I had a bunch of ryegrass coming up or cool season stuff. You can even shred on into March,
Well, the
in
earlier
specific areas, and you're not going to hurt your bunch grasses, but you need to be careful because you may start getting into your nesting season, stuff like that. So,
and I guess the earlier you do it, you protect your threat of wildfires and stuff throughout the winter. If you do it in August, you don't have all that tall standing dormant grass, dried grass that could be a fire hazard.
Yeah, and that reminds me when I was working on the border fence, and I was working, I think, south of Deming, Arizona, a little place called Antelope Wells on the Boot Hill of New Mexico. There was a ranch I always drove by, and I wish I'd have stopped and taken a picture of. They had a big old sign out there, and it was all BLM, just properly grazed desert grasslands, and they had a sign out there that said, grazing prevents blazing. And it's so absolutely true.
Sure it is.
Yep.
And if you're not going to graze it, you got to do something with it.
Sure, yeah, because eventually the decadent grass is not good for anything, wildlife or even the plant itself. So those grasslands needed some type of disturbance.
Yes.
And same with our post oak savanna, it needed some type of disturbance, and blackland prairie. So when we're trying to get that system, we need to be thinking about grazing, shredding, fire, those things, disking, using them as a tool.
And so you want to do it before the fawning period because the deer will lay their babies inside of all this cover and stuff. And if you go way too long, I think I told a story before where we had all the deer laying out there and you can't see them. If they're out there in this thick, dormant, just overburden of dead blue stem and I mean even like things like Johnson grass and that type of stuff, you're not going to see them in there. If you go to shredding too late, they're not going to get up and run when you get close to them with a tractor. You're going to run smooth over them.
Yeah, especially if they're young, like young, so definitely don't be shredding them. I mean, sometimes you have to around your houses or fire breaks, but from a wildlife management standpoint, try to shred between August and, say, March.
And it makes a good
like
mulch
that.
on the ground, too.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
A good compost, a good mulch for cover. And me and Chancey were actually talking about that earlier, about probably being one of the main reasons we don't see turkeys around here is because of the fact that you don't see a whole lot of these grass types like what Chancey's talking about with the...
No, in my opinion.
While we're talking about the fawning and nesting period, I guess is what we're talking about more.
Yes, and so like I said, a fawn, a white-tailed deer, isn't near as picky as a mother hen, quail, or turkey. And because the mother fawn, I mean, it doesn't matter. She could lay her babies in a solid hay grazer field, sorghum, alum, or Johnson grass, they'll be fine. Or, it's not what they prefer, or
They got long legs. They could walk over the top of taller grasses.
Yeah. But as me, like when I look across this county, Milam County, we got woodland, we got bottomland. Theoretically, we ought to have some turkeys, we ought to have some quail. But what we don't have is brooding cover. I think the number one limiting factor, and this is just my opinion, for quail and turkey is brooding and nesting cover. And brooding cover for turkey, when I say brooding cover, this is where the mother hen has hatched her babies and she's got baby poults following her around, and they're eating insects and spiders. But they also need to be protected from predators and aerial predators. And so brooding cover is areas of small openings, near wooded areas, near roosts, that have native grasses that were used to nest in, all those native grasses, and it has wildflowers and weeds, and there's spots of bare ground and spots of thick and spots where, but it's generally on about 3 foot tall where the mother hen can also see over it. And when you just take Milam County or most of East Texas or the East or Post Oak, Savannah in general, and you just drive across Milam County and you can count on one hand how many brooding cover areas you see. It's either row crops or it's improved pastures. Those areas that were once
or a pretty thick brush,
are thick, enormously thick brush. Yo Pond thickets are just as bad as an improved pasture. Pretty much from a quail trying to nest standpoint, or a turkey trying to nest or brood her young in as well. So it's either like been overused or underused or something in between. And in my opinion, that same holds true for quail, the conversion of these native little microsites and native grasslands, and native range. Back in the 40s and 50s, everybody had native land, and they grazed it, and they farmed it in little farms and stuff. And there was a lot more quail and turkeys back then.
Well, there's a lot of people who are starting to convert their property to wildlife management.
Yes,
and they're trying to get quail started. And so all this shredding, this burning, this disking is very important if you're going to try to get quail going.
Sure, and especially if you've got those improved pastures, and I'm not knocking improved pastures because I like to eat beef too, and I support our beef producers, 100%. But from a landowner wildlife type goal, if you got an area that's mostly improved pasture, you might want to consider killing that improved pasture and planting some native grasses in there, some native wildflowers and forbs, if that's your goal, or if your goal is to do both, maybe plant, leaf corridors. There's ways to manipulate to where you can do both,
and
rather than just having a monoculture of nothing out there that doesn't provide nesting cover, fawning cover, brooding cover, loafing cover, any of that stuff.
Well, especially in a hayfield.
Yes.
I'm really impressed with what I see out of native grass hays as compared to coastal hay, as far as the nutrients, as far as the tonnage. They don't need the inputs. They do better in dry weather due to a better root system.
Yes.
You see, they're more adapted. They're native. They grew up here. So they know what to do in all situations.
Yeah.
So hay meadows are a real good place if you're starting to think about something.
Absolutely.
What would be one of the best species for that?
For
if you were looking for something for tonnage for hay,
upland species in uplands, Indian grass, little blue stem, switchgrass.
I know little blue stem does wonderful.
It does well, and it can be hard to establish, and that's one of the problems, I guess, where so many of our producers, have gone to improve pasture, because the problem is with natives, you can't run the same amount of cattle per head.
Well, I'm talking in hay meadows,
Oh, yeah, just tonnage,
grazing is
different thing. Yeah,
I tell you what, let's just do a whole episode on that one day.
Let's do that.
Because I'm really interested in converting some of these coastal Bermuda pastures that we have back to native grasses. Because from what I've been seeing lately, and the more I talk to people, there's a lot of value in that.
It is, and it also helps with the water, the water table and infiltration. The root system on native grasses is much, much more. So it's its own topic. It's important. Well, but so in the bottomland, eastern gamma grass or something like that.
It depends on what soil type too. You can't really just blanket it with one species.
No,
that's for sure.
No, but one downfall, and I'm hoping we're getting better, is a lot of these native grasses are expensive to plant. You have to have specialized
and tough to get
equipment.
established.
It takes years. You're not going to see results overnight, and that's so much of a problem with just human nature. We want to see things yesterday. It's just like deer. I want big deer yesterday, or I want native grass now. I want quail, but it's a process. And Rome wasn't built overnight, and so, brush management, native grass management, all that stuff. It's a process, not a project. It's not something that can be started today and abandoned tomorrow.
Right. But it gives you something to do, though, and keeps you from getting bored.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you own land, that's always going to be the case. So
It sure is. So once again, Chancey, what are those 4 things that we can be doing in the woods right now?
right now, we can be prescribed burning. We can be doing some census stuff with our browse surveys. We can be doing some disking and fire guards or disking for make natural food plots. And we can be doing shredding, and there's all kinds of things, I mean, I guess you could be start thinking about right now if you have nest boxes out there, getting your nest boxes cleaned out because your titmice and your black cap or Carolina chickadees are fixing to start nesting, Be thinking about having those nest boxes ready to go for your bluebirds, or even your wood ducks, if you got duck boxes out there. So those are things that you can be thinking about right now. And then also definitely be thinking about if you are on wildlife management, that, your annual report, it's coming. It'll be due in April. So.
And we might hit on that a little next episode.
Yeah, something.
And so that kind of covers that. But now here's one thing going on I guess this is this hits all aspects. This hits yards. This hits golf courses. This hits pastures. Wildlife. This hits pastures. This hits not really farmland, a little bit, I guess, but gophers.
Gophers, yes.
Gophers and moles. In the sandy land, they're a real problem.
They really are. In Milam County, and I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. There's 2 words I learned never to say, and I just said one of them. And when it comes to wildlife and biology, you never say never, and you never say always.
They just won't fit.
No, it sometimes depends. So, but in general, we don't have gophers and moles in the blackland vertisols. I mean, I never saw any in Uralton or Mullrock growing up.
They'd be pretty exhausted from trying to dig a burrow in that.
Yeah, just think about where we get the dry cracks. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah,
that could really cause a little issue with your little runway you got dug
sure
there.
Could, especially if y'all know what I mean by these vertisol cracks. If you live out in the blackland of Milam County, Thorndale or Thrall or Uralton's object or that area, Mullrock, then you know what I'm talking about.
Well, probably the biggest issue with it too out there is when the clay traps the water inside of those open tunnels they have. It's almost like a crawfish hole.
Yeah.
At that point, and I don't really think a gopher would do too good in that water and mud.
No, and like I said, they just don't occur. They're a burrowing species, so they need like your mollisols. Those type soils are either your sandy loam, sandy silts. To dig and burrow, something that maintains movement. Year round.
And having cattle in the sand before. We really used to cuss gophers. I mean, they're bad. They're huge. They seem to be a huge problem out there. They make these mounds everywhere. They dig these tunnels that collapse and cause different problems. There's a million different reasons why a person could hate a gopher and a mole.
And they can be, I'm telling you can get too many gophers, just like you can get too many deer. I've seen pastures and even native pastures that have a gopher problem, I'm thinking, I know that they're kind of a keystone species and they provide lots of beneficial things to the soil and the environment and creating habitat for other species. But in my opinion, too, you can get too many of them. When you look at some of those, you really see them like after you've done a prescribed burn and you look out there and like, you
see all that fresh sand piled up everywhere.
70% of my habitat out there is piled up dirt from a gopher.
And that's what you could see, not to mention what's going on underground.
Mm-hmm.
And so... you mentioned these gophers, but moles are equally bad.
Yes, and we need to discuss moles and gophers right quick because I think there's a lot of confusion on. So basically,
I'm not gonna lie, I was very confused on the two until I got to talking to Chancey about it. They're really quite different species.
Oh, but they're different orders. I mean, they're as different as a primate from a rodent. They're in complete different order.
Only thing they have in common really is that they dig a hole.
Kind
in
of
the
the
ground.
biology of the species. So a mole, we have the eastern mole in Texas, and then we have like several species depending on which mammalogist geneticist you talk to.
And we have both of them in Central Texas.
Both, yeah, we have moles and gophers, both of them. But the biology of the species is different. But they basically occur in the same habitat types. They both like the sandier soils, the sandier loams. But they have different. Number one, I said they're a different order. The mole is its own order. It's Insectivora, whereas gophers a rodent. It's order Rodentia. And Insectivora means they're 100% meat eaters. They eat earthworms and grubs and beetle larvae and all that stuff.
Okay, so if you're familiar with biology from back in the high school days, well, there's what they call the energy pyramid, and your bottom layer is your producers, which are all your plants.
Yeah.
And then you have your primary consumers, which are the animals that eat the plants. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that's where our gophers fall.
Gopher is an herbivore.
They're herbivores. They eat the plants and stuff. But then these moles are going to be a whole level up as a secondary consumer because they eat the insects that eat the plants.
Yes, or maybe not even the plant, like your all your microorganisms, like your earthworms and some like June bug larvae, stuff like that.
Grub worms.
Grub worms, which so moles can help in that aspect. But moles, they're not. In my opinion, moles are no problem at all for the producer out there on the hayfield. They're not that big of a deal. Gophers are the issue there, but for golf courses and yards, moles can be a problem because they have different types of tunnels, and moles will get on top of the surface. So much of our yards and golf courses, we water them, and when we water them, it brings all those food to the top, your earthworms and your grubs and everything. That's where the mole gets up, and they make these surface runs, and that's where the mole is going out there, and he's after these earthworms and these grubs and these beetle larvae or whatever.
They basically tunnel at a depth of where the food is.
Yes,
if the insects are shallow, the moles are shallow.
Yeah,
if the insects are deep, the moles are deep.
Yes.
And so you might remember that movie Caddyshack. I don't know if you remember.
It's a great movie.
But it's totally false science.
Yeah, well.
Because that wasn't a gopher, that was a mole.
Yeah, well.
Because you remember the shallow little tunnels that the gopher.
Yeah.
I'm doing the quote unquote marks with my hands if you can't see that right now. But he was always chasing the gopher out there.
Yeah,
the greenskeeper
that
out there at the golf
course. That was the best part of the whole movie.
It was.
As a kid watching it, I loved Bill Murray. I still love Bill Murray.
Yeah, and so I guess in actuality, that was probably a mole with all the little shallow tunnels and all that kind of stuff. But like Chancey mentioned before, if you have a yard that you water a lot, or even if it's wet out, like in the general pastures and stuff, it's hard to get earthworms out of the ground and they're in the middle of summer to go fishing with, isn't it?
Yes.
Because them suckers are deep.
Yes.
Okay.
Very much so.
But then it comes a good soaking rain, and then you look and there's literally earthworms on top of the ground in your yard.
Yeah.
Because they stay up in where the soil moisture is right. And so in your yards and in your golf courses where you got your water sprinklers running, where you're taking good care of soil moisture, the moles are going to be pretty shallow, and you can almost see their whole tunnel, like where they've gone.
Actually, since they're and moles can be because they can't see real well, and they generally don't get out on the ground ever. Whereas a gopher technically can get out. It doesn't like to walk on land. It's mostly fossorial, which that just means they burrow underground. Gophers can. I've seen them above ground, but very rarely. Moles hardly ever. And so they can fall to predation, a lot of them. I actually have an old dog that will kill moles. She'll watch moles, when it's burrowing its tunnel, and she'll kill them, but she won't eat them. And coyotes, I've used them for bait before, for a coyote, trap, and they won't even eat them. They'll roll in them, and it's because they're so high meat eaters, I guess. They just don't taste good. I know birds of prey will eat them. They found, mole and shrew skulls and like the pellets from owls and stuff, but I know most predators, like badgers don't eat moles really, but they do love gophers. They go after gophers big time.
It's kind of back to the biology part of that with the producers, primary, secondary, tertiary consumers. We talked earlier about all the energy on Earth coming from the sun. Mm-hmm. And as you go up that pyramid from the producers to the tertiary consumers,
sure,
you lose energy at each of those levels. I wish I could remember the percentage of energy that's passed on from level to level to level. But if you think about it, and this is kind of odd to think about, but that gopher being a primary consumer has more energy. That there's more of them. There's more energy available for them to survive as compared to the moles.
Yeah, and they taste better too because that same dog, like I trap gophers in my yard, and when I trap one, I gotta stake my trap down, or she'll hear him. She'll go grab the trap, and gopher. And if I trap one, and I can throw that gopher to her, and she gobbles it right up. She loves it, She loves to eat it. But so I say you better stake it down because I've gone out there before, and I know I got a gopher, but I can't find my trap because the dog's done ate the gopher. And eventually, when I'm mowing the grass, I'll hit it with a lawnmower. My little trap go flying or something. But
and we're going to talk about those methods of gopher and mole control here in a minute. But most of the gophers that we have in our area are called Central Texas pocket gophers.
Yes, so they're pocket gophers, and like I said, depending on who you talk to, there's anywhere from 3 to probably 7 species, especially now with DNA or everything. But in general, they kind of like in our area, and so we have. If you live in gopher country, you probably have moles too. But now that we're on gophers, for the most part, we've got 2 of them that could occur here, what they call the Atwater pocket gopher and the Baird's pocket gopher. And probably there can be geographically isolated, like a boundary is a river, something like the Brazos River. If you think about it, Brazos River is a pretty big barrier.
That would be pretty tough for a gopher to burrow through.
So I think, but some of the mammalogists, that's how they try to draw boundaries. But so we do have they're pocket gophers, and they're really neat. So they have pockets on each side of their cheeks, and they're fur-lined pockets, which if you're familiar with any type of mammalogy, we also have pocket mice too, like kangaroo rats, and which are just, I don't know, they're little critters that go out there and they harvest stuff, and they stick it in their little pouches inside their cheeks, and then they can take it back and store it in underground chambers. So that's a lot of times what these...
Almost like a squirrel.
Yeah, almost like a squirrel, but they're stored in their pocket, like chipmunks and stuff can store it in their cheeks. But these have, if you trap one, you look at them, these pockets are on the outsides of their cheeks. It's not on the inside.
Isn't that neat?
They're on the outside, and they're fur-lined, and they'll shove them full of food and take them back and store them in their chambers.
And in one way, that's a benefit of a gopher, because they disperse seeds and things this way, different roots that they take them and bury them, and then they catch root there.
Yeah.
And actually, a gopher is actually considered a keystone species in many ways.
Yes, it really is. I mean, when you think about water filtration too, for us producers out there in gopher country, you've seen on really, really heavy rains how those water will follow those gopher runs, and then go blowing out and deposit in,
almost like a pipe.
It really, and then like sometimes it'll surface and just shoot up all kinds of sediment, in a whole different spot of the pasture. So it's actually almost like a little stream,
Never thought about it that way. Mm-hmm. And so they're beneficial in that way, but also there's a lot of other wildlife that uses their little tunnels and their burrows for
cover,
like different frogs and different snakes.
Yeah, certain snakes, will use their burrows and hunt gophers, and then, like in the pine snake, in Louisiana, and gopher snake in West Texas and South Texas, and also the glossy snake, that will burrow, and, they're going in gopher burrows, but also mole tunnels and mole runs. So, they provide an important function out there in the system.
And, I even read somewheres where one gopher can move 2.5 tons of dirt in a year.
Oh, I believe that.
And they take up, one gopher can occupy an acre of ground.
Yeah, and they're very territorial.
Which an acre is about the size of a football, inbounds of a football field, roughly about how big an acre is.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about it, you'll see a mound, and gophers travel in mounds when they're forming a new tunnel system. They got to do something with that dirt. So they're moving that dirt, trying to create a tunnel. Well, they got to do something with it, so they bring it to the top. And so that's where you're seeing the mounds. They're trying to, and most of the time those mounds are in a line.
They are.
And you can see, but then, they'll stop. But that's only one gopher. Gophers are super duper territorial, and and their home ranges don't overlap until breeding season, which is coming up about right now. Generally, you can look out there and, believe it or not, have an acre or 2 or 3 acres, and you may be only dealing with 2 or 3 gophers. So that's something on a smaller scale. You could deal with that animal by trapping, using traps to get them. But you start getting on a pasture level where you got 600-acre hay fields, then you got that's a lot of traps to go out there. And depending on how much use you got, you can tell how many gophers or how bad your problem is just on how many mounds you've got.
Absolutely. And so we talked about the good things that gophers are for, with creating all these different things for other wildlife, and and soil drain or water drainage through soil, food source for a lot of different predators. Mm-hmm. But the bad things can really outweigh the good things in a yard, from a lawn standpoint, from a golf course standpoint, from a pasture, from a hayfield standpoint.
You try to mow over a gopher mound.
Oh my goodness!
And not only that, they burrow underneath driveways or something, or a gravel road, or your gravel driveway. So those burrows are generally about 8 inches deep. And then if it get a heavy rain, it'll collapse on you. Now you got a trench in your driveway. Or if you got them real bad, they'll burrow under sidewalks and stuff and screw up the foundation
of your house.
Yeah, I mean, they can. Same with armadillo, burrowing up underneath, and then it rains, and so they have a place in nature, but that necessarily isn't in our yard.
And one of the biggest disadvantages of a gopher, not necessarily so much for a mole. Again, you don't hardly see moles too much unless it's in your yard and you've got the right amount of moisture and they're burrowing shallow. But the gophers like to eat. They eat plants. So they eat roots and all different types of things. They really really harmful to things like your
Gardens.
grass, your garden, trees.
Yeah, I planted some trees the other day. It's very proud. Been watching them. Had deer proof around them. Been babying them, and went out there. This was back in the fall. Went out there, and overnight that tree turned brown. I was like, what? No. I know I've been taking care. I've been a tree. I've been babying, and went out there and just picked it up. A gopher had bit it off underneath the ground at the root level. It's not coming back.
Golly.
Yeah.
And so you don't think about the gophers being bad in that way, because you think of so much as, like you said, the mounds being a problem, messing up hay equipment, making pastures rougher, destroying grasses in a pasture. But then also you got the whole issue with the trees and different things like that.
Yeah, your little young ones, especially if you got a garden and a gopher in it, they can just wreak you all kinds of havoc.
Do we know how many babies they could have a year, Chancey?
They can have up to 6, but generally it's 2 to 3 is what they'll raise, a female. And they pretty much have, breeding season is about right now. Very territorial.
And a gopher only lives a year or two, very short lifespan.
A year or two they can live, I'm sure, depending on
mostly because of predation, probably.
Predation gets them. Because like I said, they will get out and about every now and then. And some, like if you've ever had like I said, some cats, house cats, I'm not advocating house cats by any means. I can't, don't even get me on house cats. But anyway, I've seen cats catch them before, and I know like hawks and stuff could probably get them as well. And like I said, badgers and coyotes dig them up, snakes get them, all kinds of stuff. So they're a food source. Whereas a mole, on the other hand, not much eats it. And so
not only do they not like how it tastes, but they're hard to get out of those deeper burrows.
Yeah, and they just not much eats them, so they can actually live longer. I've read sometimes like a mole may live 5-6 years, or more. Believe it or not, for a little small mammal, that's pretty remarkable from a small mammal level. And what's neat about moles is they're an insectivore. They're in the same family as shrews, y'all. So they're like super energetic, just like little balls of fire. They can eat, like they have what's called a super high surface area to volume ratio. So they lose a lot of heat just maintaining bodily function, just the energy that it requires them to stay alive. So they can eat, or they need. Moles have to eat like 33% of their body weight every single day just to stay alive.
And remind you, this is in insects, not necessarily in plant growth. They don't eat plants. They're not herbivores.
It's insects and earthworms and grubs and beetles and beetle larvae, stuff like that. So from a grub standpoint, moles can be good, but the problem is the damage that they can do, So they make specific traps to target moles versus traps to target gophers in your yard.
Yeah, so it's easy to know. So I'm sure there's an economic threshold here, like there is with flies on cattle, like there is with anything else. And at up to which point you say, okay, we have too many gophers here. In a yard, it's probably one.
Yes, it is.
And so mole or gopher wise, in a hayfield, of course, is going to be a little more because it's so expensive to control those things. Being as though a 5-gallon bucket of gopher poison now will run you like almost $200.
Yeah, and just diesel right now and time
and the equipment it takes to do it. So there's an economic threshold there. So don't go thinking that like all cattle ranchers are just going to go out there and destroy the gopher population for fun, because that doesn't happen. You wait till you get to an economic threshold, like, okay,
you're losing money. They're costing you.
This is getting bad. We're going to have to try to knock out X number of gophers. We're going to have to try to do something to get rid of some of them. And so mole and gopher damage, although you don't see a lot of mole damage, they can cause problems, especially on golf courses and yards. But there's two very different ways of controlling the two, simply because of the biology of the two different animals.
Yeah, so, in general, poisons don't work on moles.
Because most of the poisons are a grain that's coated in strychnine.
Yeah, or another poison out there like Milo.
I
think there's, they'll like if you go buy gopher bait, or something like that. And there's a lot of stuff out there that I hear mole away or this away. But in general, if you got a mole problem, you probably got to trap him, because there's not a poison that I know of. And then maybe they make a poison, but the biology of the species tells me that no, a poison doesn't work on them unless that poison is going to be taken up by the insect population. If that was the case, that'd be terrible. That would be really bad. So you can't have that. You can't have poisons moving up trophic levels. So
I think that's what happened with diazinon. It was an insecticide that I think got carried up the levels through ducks and that type of thing, which you can't hardly get diazinon anymore.
No, you can't.
But so like Chancey said, most of these commercial gopher poisons are a grain that's coated with strychnine. There's another cheaper alternative out there. I think strychnine is still the number one used control method for gophers. But here with a mole, you have something that doesn't even eat grain.
Yes.
And so you're kind of wasting your money if what you have is a mole problem compared to a gopher problem.
Mm-hmm.
And which, like Chancey said, usually you could tell the difference due to the difference in tunneling.
The tunneling, and they don't go. Moles will mound, like they've got to do something with. Like I said, they got two different types of tunnels. One's that real deep tunnel, where they're just like a gopher. They have to bring that to the top, but once they have it established, moles generally don't mound nothing near as much as gophers. Like I can tell you, and I've trapped gophers and moles for years, but I can count on one hand how many times I've seen mole mounds. But I see 90% of the damage you see from a mole is going to be the above ground surface tunnels. The tunnels, and generally they'll follow a sidewalk. So like when you're trying to find them, especially like if they've gone down, because it seems like you're kind of like hog trapping. You see the damage, then you go out there try to trap them where the mole's already moved on. So, but a lot of times they have what I call main runs that they use all the time. That's like
and they branch off of this.
Yeah, their interstate highways is what they use all the time, and that's usually like a fence row or a sidewalk, something like that. That's a main tunnel. It's usually a little deeper. It's not a raised elevated run. Whereas the raised elevated runs, what you're seeing is causing the damage. You can trap them in that. But those are like what I call little lateral runs. They don't use them near as often, except when the food source is there. So target those areas. They make several different kinds of mole traps. The ones that I like the best are, number one, the Victor out-of-sight mole trap. I think that's the best mole trap out there. Steve Albano out of California makes a couple. He has a business called Trapline Products, I think, and he makes mole and gopher traps. I don't use his mole traps as much. I have some, but I love his gopher traps. To me, that's the best gopher trap out there.
And I'm
not trying to market anybody at all, but I mean, it's just what I use in my opinion.
Well, we might one day make a video of how to go out there and to set these traps and do this different thing.
Yeah, because you need a probe, especially for gophers. So you've got that mound. So say you've got this mound. Well, there's a tunnel in between those mounds. So what I always do is I have me like a 14-inch, real skinny, old Phillips screwdriver. Well, I go out there and I start probing in the ground until I find that tunnel, because you can feel it, the ground gives. When you push that probe down in between those two mounds, you just start pushing. Eventually, you'll hit that tunnel. And most of the time, they're about 8 inches deep, 6 inches. Sometimes they can be shallow, but generally they're in that 8-inch range.
And this is for moles or gophers?
No, this is for gophers.
Okay. Moles will be too deep. You ain't never going to find it.
Well, you can, but sometimes you got to go really deep. But most time on the moles, you catch them on surface runs, especially the little highway surface runs that aren't as shallow but aren't that deep, So, but for gophers specifically, and then once you find that tunnel, take a shovel, dig it out, and then you'll find that tunnel and you clean out both sides and you set 2 traps. You need 2 traps because you don't know which way it's coming from. Because like I said, it's just one gopher except during breeding season. They're highly territorial. Set your 2 traps in there, bed it really, really, really good. The key is to have it bedded. So you push that trap inside that tunnel, and then that way that gopher, and then you cover it up so it's completely dark. He don't know.
So after you dig this hole, you need to put like a piece of cardboard, a piece of wood.
Yeah.
You don't push the dirt back in the hole.
No, I don't. I leave it open, in there, but I cover it, and then I put all the dirt that I dug from the hole up on top of that, and don't let any light in. And that gopher's going to know something's up. Some people even take peanut butter and just put a slab of peanut butter on the hole inside. And I don't know. I don't do that too much. But some people think it makes them, hey, what's that smell? I'm going to stop pushing all that dirt. And one of the reasons that I like that albino trap is because a lot of the little Victor gopher traps, and like I said, I'm not trying to knock and promote anything. I'm just telling you what I've observed. They have the paddle, the trigger on that trap is solid. So if that gopher, if he's pushing dirt, a lot of times he's pushing that dirt, and if that trigger trap is solid, that dirt is hitting that pan, and it's setting the trap off before the gopher gets inside the trap.
Oh,
does that make sense?
Yes.
Whereas the Trapline product trap, it's got the trigger, which is the same. It functions the same way, but it's hollow. Like it's only got the perimeter. It's only metal. It's not a solid wall like a solid pan. So the gopher can technically be pushing dirt, and when it gets there, that dirt will technically push through there a little bit, and then let him get there and come in contact with the trigger and set the trap off.
And while you're on the topic of traps, gopher and mole traps are very different.
Yes, very different because of the biology of the species. And so my favorite mole trap is probably the Victor out-of-sight trap. But they also make the little spike traps, which work real good for the tunnels. And like I said, there's a trap line trap too that works really good too. The problem that I have with the trap line trap is really good sugar sand soils, which we have a lot of. It's harder to me to function. That's where an out of sight trap, which is Victor makes a big, and y'all have seen them. They're the ones like that have teeth. You basically the mole makes its tunnel, and you dig out a spot on there. And what I like to do is dig that spot out in that tunnel where he's got, because that mole's going to use it, especially if you find the main one like next to a sidewalk. Dig a little spot out that's just big enough for that out of sight trap. And make you some cuts in it for the jaws of that trap. Set it in there, get it all going, then do a dummy test. So sometimes there's roots and rocks and stuff there. You want to make sure those get out of the way so it doesn't interfere with your trap. Then once you have that all done, you build like a little bridge of dirt in the middle of that tunnel. And then you set your trap down in there and let the trigger hit the top of that bridge of dirt. So when the mole's coming through there, he hits that little pile of dirt, and that's no problem. He's used to digging around rocks and roots and everything. Well, he'll start pushing that dirt out of the way, and when he's doing it, a lot of times he's pushing up. And when he starts pushing up, he pushes up, and he sets that trigger out off, and that gets him.
So moles, about the only way about the only way you're going to catch a mole is with a trap. There's not really too many other ways or they make these different. I think they make these different like almost like smoke bombs, like these gases you could put down into a
tunnel system.
Tunnel system where into their holes or tunnel systems or burrows, where like for instance, I think we have one at the store. It's called the Giant Destroyer. It's called a super gasser, and its active ingredients are sodium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal. And I guess you light this and you put it down in the burrow, and it just basically fumigates a burrow. I guess is one way besides the fact that you could do as Chancey says and trap them. I guess that's one other way.
Yeah, because I don't know, and I know they make repellents and poisons, so-called poisons for moles, but I just I don't think they work very efficiently. Probably some fumigation like that, or some carbon dioxide that chokes them out, or something from a mole standpoint, or trapping them would be your best. And the good thing about moles are generally damage on a small level, a yard or a golf.
So you're perfectly capable of trapping them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're not going to worry about them too much in a pasture setting.
And in my mind, I've never seen like moles in the pasture. I see their runs, all the time on my place, and big deal. It's not damaging anything. It's just a run that you see going out there every now and then.
Sure. And so I guess it's important to kind of point out, too, that you mentioned that they do all this burrowing underground basically because they're not very fast on top of the ground. So they basically are, due to their biology, they're built to tunnel.
Yep, fossorial.
And Chancey talked about the amount of energy, the amount of insects that a mole has to eat. Well, reading up on it, it says that a mole or a gopher can use 3,400 times the amount of energy to burrow the same distance that me or you could walk in. And so if you think about that, that's a lot of calories. So they got to eat quite a bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, and you think about, too, like how small these little mammals are. And that's a lot of dirt to push. You look at some of those lines of mounds, and you just think about an animal the size of a gopher that's occupy a space the size of a football field. It's pretty big.
Absolutely. And so we have the traps and we have the different fumigants that you could use for the mole. Now gophers, on the other hand, are a little easier to control because the fact that they'll eat plants and seeds and that type of different thing. Like we said, they make different gopher poisons that have strychnine on it, which is the chemical that it's coated with. And so they make different ways that you can control these gophers with that. They make a little probe that if it's a yard setting or something like that, you can buy the poison in pretty small amounts, and you stick these things basically through, like Chancey discussed earlier, like he mentioned with the screwdriver about stabbing it through. You get these poison probes, I guess is what I would call it. You stick it down until you feel that it's inside of a burrow, and you funnel a little bit of the poison down in there, and it's a grain. And the gophers come through there, they round it up and eat it, and that controls them. And if it's in a pasture standpoint or in a hayfield, they make
the gopher machine.
The gopher machines, they go on the 3-point of a tractor, and you buy that poison by the 5-gallon bucket. You pour it in there. It's already geared with a ratio of putting out the right amounts. And so I think you're supposed to mainly cover your perimeters.
Yeah, you go around all your perimeter. It depends on how many, but go around the perimeter, at least once, sometimes twice.
Yes,
for sure.
And around different spots of brush. You go around the edges of that. And then after that, you just go through and you strip it in. And
about 25 to 30 feet
apart.
Mm-hmm. It depends on how I think my Gopher plow, is set to where if you go 25 feet apart, it puts out about 2 pounds per acre. But that's with one little hole. You can adjust it by pull out the little rotor and turn it around to make it double that amount, so 4 pounds per acre. But about 25 to 30 pounds is what most people. 25 to 30 feet is what most people is how much they separate the plows.
Roughly. It doesn't have to be an exact science.
And that gives you about 2 pounds per acre of poison out there.
Yeah.
And it's underground, y'all, so, the poison's not sitting there on the ground, because that's something to be aware about. It's milo, so you don't want to spill this on top of the ground, because birds will eat milo, chickens will eat milo, and this is laced with strychnine. So it's something that goes underneath the ground. And so
well, the
only thing that can get it is a Gopher.
The way this equipment works is it's got a big, not a big, but on the bottom of the plow, it's got like a
furrow builder.
A furrow builder, and what it does, it makes an artificial gopher hole.
Yes,
gopher burrow is what it does, and so it makes an artificial burrow, and it drops these seeds almost like a planter.
Yep.
Into this burrow, and the gophers come through, they burrow through, and they pick these seeds up, and of course it gets them.
Yes.
But that's easy way to do it. Like Chancey said, 2-3 pounds to the acre. Doesn't take a lot to do it. And now, if you're going to control these things, now's the time of the year to be doing it.
Sure.
Because they're about to start breeding.
Mm-hmm. And they're about to start breeding, so they're going to get more active males and females.
Well, you're going to get more of them in a few months, too, once they've had babies. So
you want you want the female gophers to get poisoned before they have babies, from a hay pasture standpoint. So right now is a good time to be gophering, putting gopher poison out there into your pastures. And not only that, the good thing about it, because those gopher plows are, they don't affect the soil too much, and you can do it right now, and then by the time hay, even if it does make a little ripple or
very little,
but by the time hay season's here, you can't even tell that it was done, because the grass has grown over it already, So right now you can watch what you're doing, I guess. Most of those things, the main thing to pay attention, make sure that the wheels are always moving, that way it's putting the poison out. And
do you have a chain on there, I think, that needs to be oiled?
If you hit a root or hit a rock, sometimes it can jar it and knock the chain off, and you just need to be paying attention all the time while you're doing it. Make sure that the last thing you want to do is do a whole bunch of acres and find out you weren't putting seed out, So I've done it.
I was going to say, that's easily done.
Yes.
And so that kind of, I guess, wraps up the gopher and mole conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
now's the time to do it. If you want to control your moles in your yard, you're gonna have to. They got the above ground kind of burrow-looking shallow burrows, possibly.
Yeah,
if they're deep enough, you probably wouldn't worry about it anyway.
Yeah, and like I said, moles are most of the problem in your yard, your landscape stuff.
You got to trap them, you got to gas them. It's the only way you're gonna deal with those.
Yeah, in my opinion, trapping's the best way to get them.
And then you
got go to the store and buy a couple of traps and just have on hand, and then when you see some damage, go out there, because those burrows will stay, especially moles. Those major highways, they'll stay intact for a long time. And so even if you trap a mole, when another one a year down the road will come back and reuse those same tunnels. So, it's good to have them on. If you live in this type of habitat and you're a landscaper, moles and gophers are kind of part of it.
Yes, and so I guess that wraps up that. You could join in our conversation if you'd like to. I created a Facebook page that I hadn't really put anything on called Talking Country with Brad and Chancey. You could go there and like our page, and you could even message us on Facebook Messenger there if you have any feedback or things you'd like to ask or like to say. Of course, you could follow me on there too. My name again is Brad Vosselin. That's V as in Victor, Aculin. It's Czech. Doesn't sound anything like it's spelled. But my grandpa used to say, I don't care what you call me as long as you call me for supper, because I've been called every kind of last name you could possibly think of. And so Vaculin, Vaculin, but Brad Vosselin is my name. And again, this is Chancey Lewis that I'm with. And he's Facebookless, Chancey. He don't have a Facebook page, but I share with him all the stuff that you say. So we appreciate you listening again this week, and hopefully you got something out of that about what you need to be doing in the woods for your wildlife, or a good way of handling gophers or moles. I guess this is it for this week. Chancey, once again, as always, it was a real pleasure. We hit over, I want to say, I thought I looked this morning, had over 1,100 downloads.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's, from our first six episodes, I think it was, or 7 now. This makes episode 8 already, and it's always enjoyable to be here with all you guys, and thank you for listening. And to some of you people across the nation who listen and listen loyally, there's a little map that tells us where people are listening at different parts of the world, basically. But it's kind of neat that we have listeners up in Michigan, we have listeners in Illinois. Pretty much every state there's at least 1 or 2 people or some people who are listening. And so it's kind of interesting to see that. And so to you people, we say thank you for listening, and feel free to contact us on Facebook and let us know what you think, and we appreciate you listening. But I hope you guys have a good week, and I guess that this is signing off for this week, and I hope y'all have a good one, and I guess we'll talk to you next week.
Sure enough. Enjoyed it, Bradley. All y'all out there, take care and have a wonderful week.
Talk to you later.